continue our discussion of the kind of issues of the day with an eye towards remembering that in Solid Ground what we want to do is run those issues all the way back to their baseline philosophical assumptions. So we'll do that today. I'll maybe each morning I'll report a little bit on where we sit on debate prep too, for those that are interested or become interested or want to have a minor hand in it, but very temporary, or just want to have an opinion about it. Feel free to jump in and out at your pleasure. But I've gotten 2 of his books, his 500-page Why I Became an Atheist, and the more recent of his books, which is The Outsider Test for Faith. And I've started to run through and review them and make notes and that kind of stuff. Will Gaines is going to moderate, and Peter Dixon has also volunteered to help with the bulk of the pre-debate prep and research. So give a quick précis of what I've come across, and then we'll jump into the class. But on what I've come across is it's almost there's a little bit too much to critique, because not only, you read the back of the book and it's like, man, this is all the arguments against theism, this is great. And you go through it and you look for an actual argument, and it's so far, I have not found a complete argument. So there's a lot of pointing in this direction kind of stuff. And at no point yet have I found where he's actually made an entire argument. And he interacts briefly, he interacts with the classical arguments for God. The moral argument, he cites a Christian philosopher or theologian who says well, I don't think the moral argument's a good argument. And he says, well, if I think it's Richard Swinburne maybe. He says, well, if Swinburne doesn't think it's a good argument, then I don't even have to deal with it. And he literally ignores the entire argument because Richard Swinburne says, I don't think it's a good argument. On the ontological argument, he runs through the history of it. He's like, this is Anselm, this is what he says. Here's some critiques of what Anselm said, Hume and Kant or whatever else. And he is, in some cases, materially wrong about what he says. He'll say, well, Kant's objection was you can't have any extra mental argument that's ever going to actually deal with the physical world. And I'm like, that was not Kant's objection to the ontological argument. Kant's objection was that existence is not a property to which you can ascribe. And Kant's objection resulted in philosophers turning around and saying, that's right, Kant is right about that, but what he's missing is necessary existence is a property that some things have and some things do not have. And what's being posited by Anselm is necessary existence, not mere existence. So Kant's objection, the entire philosophical world, as far as I know, recognizes Kant's objection is invalid on those grounds. Not that they grant the argument goes through, or that all the premises are certain. But anyway, when you have a critique where the guy doesn't even list doesn't even list the arguments against his argument against, pick one. He just lists some other people who've talked about it and some of their objections without showing their full argument. It's hard, and to critique his argument. And when I listen to him and Wood, you have the same problem. You don't have completed arguments getting made. So one of the things I would like to head towards is, I don't know whether it's a doable task, but in a 15-minute or 20-minute statement, can you give to, you guys get it, because we've all been thinking about this for a long time, but can the average person who walks into any auditorium be made to understand what an argument is, why it's important, and how to recognize one? Can you do that in 5 minutes or 3 minutes? And if so, we'd like to set that standard and be like, here's how you can tell whether somebody's actually making an argument or whether they're hand-waving and being pejorative and using a bunch of rhetorical tricks. All these things go in rhetorical tricks bag. If you don't see this, it doesn't count. Anyway, I'm thinking about it. Okay, Peter, yeah, go ahead.
That's exactly what I was thinking about doing as the opening thing if I was going to moderate, explaining that to everyone and saying, make sure to recognize these things and look for the actual arguments and look for the arguments that cannot be applied in both directions. You believe this because you were raised to believe this. Okay, well, that could apply the other direction too.
Right. Yeah, that was an interesting, Loftus mentioned that in the David Wood debate. He's like, yeah, you guys, basically Christians believe this because they were brought up to believe this. And Wood was like, yeah, I was an atheist. And now I'm a Christian. And my buddy here, roommate, was an atheist. And Nabil Qureshi was a Muslim. And he was supposed to believe Muslim stuff was true. So that obviously doesn't work like that. That was a super quick one, but it's almost like the whole audience missed it. that was this instant like, well, all of that was wrong, obviously, just because I'm standing here. But anyway, yeah, that's a good point, Peter, that might be the time to do it. Okay, on to our discussion. This is where we left off last time. At least graphically, this is where we left off last time. So does anybody, I forgot who, I pointed to someone and said you have the floor. It was you. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I was making the point that with abortions, it's not good for women.
Okay.
In the physical and mental health aspect, women who've had abortions are 81% at higher risk of decreased mental health after abortion. And then, of course, with the actual procedure, like that, there's physical risks as well.
Right.
Including, like, if it messes up infertility afterwards, that
Yes.
could have been avoided.
So I remember why I got excited about this point. I mean, it's a good point in and of itself. But this one also points to what I think is the formulaic answer to all the social. How would you classify? What name would you give to the topics we're discussing? Kind of the social, societal, cultural considerations of maybe morality that we're having right here. Whatever you would call this topic. If anybody thinks of a good name, let me know. But all of these have the same property. So let me ask a question. We'll come back to some of these specific points, but let me generalize, let me go specific. We'll tie a few of these specifics together with a general principle and then see how applicable it is all the way around.
You're saying like effects? Is that like some of it?
Yeah, well, I think it is effects, but I don't think that that's the way that most people conceive of it. That is a very Christian view to take this as an effects-based thing, but you're right. At the end of the day, the wise old Christian can just be like, this is all the effects of sin, son. And you'd be like, yeah, yes, you're right, okay. we're trying to at least appear more philosophical than that, but that's probably right. I think almost everybody agrees that life-altering, addiction-level drug use is bad for everybody. Like, I don't know many people who will defend the heroin addict's lifestyle as like, no, this is something that you ought to be allowed to do it, but this is a favorable outcome. Everybody seems to be, I say everybody, both sides of the political spectrum at a minimum in America, seem to say this, nobody likes this and thinks it's good. The one side is like, those guys did it to themselves, toss them out. The other side is like, no, we need to coddle them and give them, needles and, to help them on a path out. But nobody turns around and is like, it's probably fine. Like they're obviously happy, there's no big deal. So
At one time in our society, the only remedy for pain, because you experience pain from disease and accidents, what have you, and they had no cure for it, so they gave you cocaine. It was quite common to have mixtures of opium and that people took in the 1800s, 1700s to help you suffer through your condition.
Right.
But because there was no cure for what you had. If you were dying of cancer, they gave you an opium solution.
Right. So, but let's say that even
so you die.
Right. Even outside of what do they? I forget what the actual technical term is for this. With the care, palliative care or whatever. Yes. So
at one time it was acceptable.
Well, nobody would turn around and say an active, young, otherwise healthy person who chooses to be addicted at this level. And everybody's like, oh yeah, man, leave him alone. He's perfectly fine. He's obviously not perfectly fine.
You're saying like escaping from reality?
Yeah, where you live for the fix, and your whole life revolves around it, and it impacts your jobs and your relationships and all that kind of stuff. Like true, what psychologists would call addiction level behavior. Addiction is often defined in psychology today, modern-wise, as far as I can tell, in terms of its effects on the other portions of your life, not the degree. Nobody turns around and says this metric volume of this drug use per day equals addiction. It's how does it affect your life? So let me ask you this. Why do you think, what do you think everybody's argument, an argument that everybody would agree is the right counter to the following statement? Leave the heroin addict alone, he's happy. So what's the answer back to that? Why do we say no?
He's disordering his life.
Okay, but what if he's happy? So I'll be for a second, let me argue for high levels of heroin addiction.
is the main goal.
So happiness, say it again, Peter.
Happiness is the most important thing.
Happiness is the most important thing, says Peter. And I say, yeah, but my heroin addict is happy. Leave him alone. He doesn't need your help.
Your average person, I think, is going to respond to say something along the lines of like, they may think they're happy, but they're not as happy as they could be.
Okay. I think that's, I mean, here we are. That was one answer turned to what I think is the right answer. But I think the answer is we're saying all of us recognize that the claim of the heroin addict to be happy is on any reasonable graph of happiness right here, that the heroin addict is this happy, and the argument of like, no, he's perfectly happy, he's as happy as he could possibly be, that's simply not the case, that the average human being is happy up to this level. And so nobody in their quote unquote right mind would argue that the heroin addict is actually anywhere near as happy as he could be.
But once you're a heroin addict, can you ever, I mean, it's hard to kick. I mean, even when you've kicked it,
Yes.
its claws are in you.
Yes.
And you don't just go on and be happy
Yes.
the way you could have been if you never started. So I don't know.
But consider, and I think the argument that I would make there would be, yes, but the heroin addict, when they escape this and they finally come back to just average, hey, I'm reasonably happy today, I'm a normal human being. No particular reason to be happy, but no particular reason to be unhappy. When the heroin addict dumps this behavior and they get back to this level, they fight that it's easy to fall back into a tendency. Why does the alcoholic actively go to AA? Why do they seek treatment? They don't seek treatment because they're at some high happiness level and they say to themselves, man, I cannot wait to get back to being less happy. Right? That's not, or hey, I'm miserable now and this is the direction of happiness. I just need to go fall off the wagon. What they recognize in virtue of being here is I'm way better off and happier here than I was there. I was so misled. Thank goodness I remember this. Now, occasionally they'll fall off the wagon off the short-term thing, but they're fighting actively because of a happiness gradient. They recognize that lower happiness is in that direction. That's why I want to avoid it.
This whole class of arguments still involved, you're debating what actually makes people happy. Is this happiness? Is that happiness? What about the libertarian who comes in and says that, like, hey, people are free to get out of hell in their own handbasket if they desire. Who are you to take away their individual liberty? What consenting adults want to do, they ought to be allowed to do.
Yeah, and so to the libertarian, I put the heroin question to the libertarian. Like, at what point do libertarian, let's say it's your bride or your best friend, and she has your best friend, because it's inconceivable that you become. Your best friend becomes, well, your best friend is your bride, right? Okay, your second best friend. You see him falling down and caught in the trammels and toils of heroin addiction, and you know him, and you can see that he's just deeply, whether he recognizes it or not, he's deeply unhappy. But you're a libertarian. So politically and ideologically, you're like, hey, it's up to him to make his own choices. What would you do in that situation?
Well, I think the libertarian would still be free to attempt to help their friend. They might try to convince them personally.
Yeah, but why? So the libertarian just said, we ought to let people do whatever they want to do, but you're about to not let him do whatever he wants to do. You're about to actively try to convince him not to do that.
You wouldn't say that, hey, you can't be a positive influence on your friends and on your family.
But who are you to say positive? Freedom is what's positive, and he's acting in accordance with his own personal freedom. So why do you think it's positive for him to be out of that?
I think their solution is just they don't like the government legislating it.
Fair enough, but we're not talking about the government at this point. We're talking about you and your buddy.
So my question with this one is that we're comparing things that are, like at this point, I would say the average person, based on how I can understand it in society, would be fairly unhappy, right?
As an addict.
Right.
Yes.
Well, no.
Oh, no, in general, the background happens.
Right?
Okay.
Like the way that I'm reading the room with the society at large right now is that people are feigning happiness on social media, but are deeply missing something, right?
Yeah.
And they're certain that like God is not the answer.
Right,
Just
right.
Absolutely certain. I think there's something ontological here where we would, if we wanted to create a graph like this, we would say somebody who's maximally happy, who's probably like you would have to tie to maximally like tied into or obedient.
So hold on to this point. We're gonna get here, but I don't want to get here yet. I want to answer a specific question. Here's a specific question I want to answer. What is your justification for interfering in the choices of your friend, the heroin addict? Tell me exactly why you're doing what you're doing. Okay, but you're putting your opinion over their opinion. Because when I ask your heroin addict friend, like, hey, you want me to get you into rehab? And he's like, man, leave me alone.
Probably because you consider yourself to be a better thinker. What is making people happy than that person?
Well, what gives you the right to do that? It seems awfully arrogant.
I just happen to know that.
Okay. Yes.
I think there can be like violations of implied contracts where if you form a band and like the implied contract of the band is like you show up and perform and like one of the band members becomes an addict.
Yeah.
It's like you're failing in your duty.
Yeah.
And like a village could form and it's like the implied contract is that you don't like.
Okay, so you can point to the drain on social resources or earning potential or whatever else to say, hey, this is not good for the band, it's not good for the village. So there's a societal reason to do it. Let me grant that. Let me just say, yes, let's pretend that everybody, not pretend, I think probably everybody does agree with that. But I want to get down to the individual level. So I accept your argument 100%. Is there further to that a justification on the selfless level where you're only caring about this guy?
I mean, like in a family of friends, there can be a reciprocal agreement of like, if I become an addict, I would want you to help me, and so if you become an addict, I'll.
But here I am now. You're the addict, and I'm like, you don't understand, man. I'm happy. Like this is what I may have said that before, but this is what I want.
Well, you can't. Once you're an addict, you can't violate that, or you can't renege on it.
Well, why not?
I mean, that's most contracts. You can't just say, "I want to get out."
Well, I wasn't a contract. Like I didn't sign up for it. I was just like I was telling you back then.
Right, but it's implied duty for one another.
But a duty for what?
To keep someone from sabotaging themselves.
But here again, like with Kevin, how dare you sit in judgment of me, your best friend, because now I'm telling you you're wrong about what's going to make me happy. I know it's going to make me happy, and this is it.
But if I was sabotaging myself, I would say the same thing to you, so I would need you to ignore that.
Okay, so now what's the justification for this? Because as we're pointing out, is becoming obvious right here. What we're really saying is person A is in a position now to judge person B's thoughts about their own happiness as wrong. Yeah. And to furthermore, but maybe even by force, right? The whole like intervention, we're going to drag you to the clinic, and maybe the cops are going to strap you down to the table until you dry out. We're going to force you to become what we judge to be happier. What's the justification for doing that? Because we do that. When the cops throw you in detox, they're taking you out of your state at least long enough that you're not actively drunk at that point.
This day and age, heroin addiction, very much leads to death. Many locations that they've had in the past.
But sometimes being a soldier leads to death, and I can choose to be a soldier. Like maybe it's the death I choose. We'll take off, eh? Right.
We're not addressing what the heroin does to the person besides the physical stuff. It's making it harder for the person to make their decisions.
Yes.
It's making it harder for them to achieve what they did want to achieve in life before.
But who are we to say that what they're initially said? All the time, when we grow up, say like, well, yeah, Seth wants to be an astronaut. And that was his goal, but he changed his goal because he looked at the probabilities and was like 0.001% of people who want to be astronauts become astronauts. I need a backup plan. I'm going to go do this, whatever else. And we're like, no, man, don't change. You're wrong to do that. Let me force you back to that course of action.
I mean, we would say that you could talk it as like a form of a relationship. It's like a toxic relationship with it because it's consuming your every thought. So.
But so does love.
Yes, but what's the productiveness of it?
Well, what's the difference between love and heroin addiction? Both of them are all consuming. Both of them change major parts of your life. Both of them will change your, even the popular song like "A Man Will Turn Back on His Best Friend" if he says anything bad about his woman.
Well, we always
If a
look
man
at
loves a
the
woman.
result of it. We say if it's a toxic relationship, if your actions from it, like if you, I did it for love, and it's like.
I did it for heroin.
Yeah, or you did a bad thing from it. It's like, well, then it's not a good thing if it's making you do bad things.
Okay.
So it's not a good relationship. Heroin's not good for you. If you're stealing because you need to get your next fix. If you're, it doesn't just harm the person. It normally harms the people around them as well.
So for clarity, I'm not arguing against you because I don't think your point is valid. I happen to think your point is valid. What I think I'm trying to get us to is to answer the question of what get right in all of these things. A person who is not, there's the person who is doing the behavior, and other people out there are sitting in judgment of this person's current judgment and saying, here are all of these reasons why you are wrong about this, and we're going to help convince you that you're wrong about this one. And this person might turn around and say, how dare you, my choice, my life, my freedom, I'm a libertarian. You say you're a libertarian, and yet here you are giving me a hard time about it. Who are you to judge me? Who are you to judge me? And the answer back is what? Who are we to judge this person?
Yeah, well, I was going to say, you need sort of some source of absolute truth, otherwise it just goes down to niche, right, where it's like, look, I am currently stronger than you because you have put yourself in.
So I'll grant you this one. In fact, this is the right answer. I think we all know this is the right answer. What I'm asking for is not the answer the Christian would give. Think now like the person who doesn't believe maybe in absolute morality, someone who doesn't believe that does think that your truth is important and that kind of thing. How do you tell? What would they argue to their friend, and if so, how, that I still ought to intervene in your self-destructive behavior that heroin is leading you into?
I would argue it based on a general principle of higher short-term gain versus a little lower level of future gain. I think that's the whole point.
Yes, let's grant that, but we're not talking about short versus long-term gain.
Why not?
What we're talking about is the definite, because what we're talking about is the definite, whose right it is to define what gain is. So the heroin addict may turn around and say something like this: I'm happy to trade. The heroin addict might turn around and say the following: I'm happy to trade. We do this all the time. I've done this.
That's the whole point of Christianity.
Forget Christianity. Let me talk to you about bacon. People have told me, like, if you eat meat and you eat bacon and you whatever else, you're taking 10 years off your life. And as a young man, I've said, like, I'm happy to give those 10 years away. I'd rather live a full life of bacon than a half life of veganism. That kind of justification. And we jokingly do that, and it's semi-acceptable. But it's not acceptable to do the same thing in terms of heroin. Yeah, I could live to be 80, but I would choose to live only the next 5 years of my life if I can stay on this fix the whole time because I love it.
Or the next 30 minutes.
Or the next 30 minutes.
So I think,
and I think your graph is a little misleading there, because I think that HA is going to be at a much higher level. Much higher level.
You think the heroin addict's way happier?
I think the heroin addict is going to get a much higher sensation of happiness for the first 30 minutes or 20 minutes, or how long.
That's while they're on a high.
That's,
they're not on a high the whole time.
Yeah, for clarity.
And eventually it's going to crash.
Both of these are true. So you're correct. scientifically, I have failed to define adequately my graph here. I have not labeled my axes, nor have I labeled the
So
metric
you're
by which
trying
we're
to
using.
convince
So
them.
what we're talking about is what we would call mean happiness over time for any arbitrarily long enough period.
What most people
So I
call
think
being
from
happy.
What most people would call mean happiness over time without respect to arbitrary
from
choice.
a non,
From a secular point of view, you can argue that heroin is a poor choice, but what's the justification to exert your will over his?
Yes, that's the question.
so from a non-theological perspective,
Yes,
it's
which
going
is
to boil down to might equals right. And
It boils down to what?
might equals right. And they're going to say if this person is not just damaging themselves, but it's harmful to society as a whole, society is going to.
I'm willing to grant that one. I'm
Yeah.
still looking for, and maybe the answer is there isn't.
But
I'm looking for.
that is the only justification you have for a non-theological.
Well, does anybody have one? So he claims there is no other one. Maybe you're right. He might be right.
It's a group experiential comparison.
Forget the group. Individuals only. The world only exists between you, your best friend, and heroin.
Just might make it
Why
right,
you
you know, like,
go off and
I prefer
like,
Hold on 1 second. I'm very excited by the fact that this is generating much discussion. For the benefit of all, let us keep the collective wisdom of the table shared with everybody.
Can I make one
Yes,
simple point?
yes.
And that is, that said, no one is simple, and everyone is going to have a spaghetti of thoughts and ideas in their head and use different reasoning to intervene.
Granted, but I'm looking for even one example, or maybe the most common example of what the non-Christian would say to their friend to justify their intervention in their friend's heroin addiction.
how about for the simple fact it's illegal?
Okay, and okay, what's my answer?
It's also illegal to like kill yourself. So if you
Well, yeah, my answer back to
illegal,
illegal.
you're going to be locked up for at least
Change it out.
My answer to illegal would be like, yeah, man, but nobody cares. And like people are getting away with this, which is true. Like the number of people who are going and locking up the heroin addict for being an addict, that's relatively low. Most of the time the cops are after dealers and distributors and that kind of stuff. Eric, did you have your hand up? No? Yes, sir.
Yeah, I think you have to come to your friend with the attitude that I have no right to dictate anything. I just have no right. I'm only here to appeal. And if you're willing to hear me out,
Yes.
I have some things to say. Because I think if you come entitled that you are the authority.
All right, then let me make the example slightly tighter, and now I will make them narrow it down and see if this helps us out at all. We'll skip heroin for a second and just talk about alcohol. Somebody is drunk, quote unquote, out of their mind. Okay? And they are, in the course of their drunkenness, want to do something that is like, so obviously we'll say maybe even out of character, but that the person now wants to, hey, I'm gonna walk off this bridge, man, because I can fly, right? And you grab them, and you're like, okay, you've had too much, and you shove them in the car, and you take them back, and you have them sleep it off right now. And the guy wakes up and says, how dare you, sir? How dare you? So what do you say back to them? Like, why is that obviously acceptable to everybody? What's the reason that's obviously acceptable and nobody would argue?
So I think
If you're gonna hate me for the rest of your life, you're gonna have the rest of your life.
So I think the
Well,
problem.
even if you didn't hate them, like, what does everybody say when they're drunk? And you turn around and say, hey, do you remember what you were thinking last night? And they're like, no, man. And like, do you remember thinking that you could fly? And he was like, yeah. And he said, do you know where you were? And he was like, yeah. And I was standing at an airport, and like I was on the runway, and you're like, no, you were on a bridge with a 50-foot drop into the icy water, and I grabbed you. And what was the guy's likely going to say? What? Thank goodness for what you did, right? Thank you for doing that.
So the problem,
Why is that the case? Why did that happen?
I think the problem you're having.
I don't want to hear about the problem. Wait, hold on. I don't want to hear about the problem I'm having. I want to hear.
The thing is, you're trying to push us into a moral justification without theology.
No. I mean, I would never do that. I'm not trying to do that.
That's what you're doing.
No, I'm not.
You're saying take away.
I'll tell you why I'm not doing that. I've already
Christian
granted that the
theology.
Christian is right about this.
And
Mark,
make yourself.
Mark, hold on, bud.
What? Yeah, go ahead.
I've already granted that.
Oh.
I've already granted it. It's 100%
It's
the
not
answer.
tied to reality.
It's
So why are we
100% the
arguing?
answer. I'm trying to find out why people who don't agree with the right answer still themselves would stop their drunk friend?
Because it ties into reality.
How?
I think it's the
In
moral
what way
aspect
that
still-
is justifiable to the person that denies a moral reality?
Because you said, okay, so here's a great example. I had a friend who I worked with down in Charlotte. She has schizophrenia.
Yes.
She didn't have it when I met her, she has it now. She contacts me.
One discussion at a time, fellas, please.
She
I beg you.
contacts me every once in a while, and she's like, hey, I talked to a social worker.
Hey guys, help us out, man. Hey guys, one discussion at a time, because we don't want to miss what you're saying. It's probably right, but I want you to hear this too, because I want your commentary on this.
So every once in a while, I reach out to a social worker, and I'm like, how do I help her? Like, do I just she called me, and she was basically.
This is a schizophrenic.
I don't want to sell my body, but I don't know how else to
Stop. Yeah.
Or to exist.
Help me help myself.
So I talked to a social worker, and who had a ton of good information. Got her like a step-by-step plan to get with housing and food, state funded. But I asked. I said, "Hey, should I bring her back to my house?" And he said, "Absolutely."
Absolutely not. Yeah.
So what she's going to do is she's going to become very paranoid about you as soon as you interact with her on a regular basis.
Yes.
So this is kind of that situation where you're like, okay, how do you help somebody who is not tied into reality, right? Like Willard would say, reality is what you run into when you're wrong.
Yeah. Okay. Right.
So what I would say here is that there is there has to be some type of, it doesn't matter what you believe, there is some type of truth out there that is either true or untrue.
Okay.
And
But all this is exactly right, but I want to know what truth, how's reality smacking the person who doesn't agree with the right answer in the face hard enough that they would turn around and say something like this: if you did not help your drunk friend out from jumping off the bridge, you are a morally execrable person. Bad on you. How would you, what kind of friend are you? That's what they would say. What kind of friend would you came back and reported that I let him jump because he was happy. They'd say, what kind of friend are you? You let our friend die. Yeah, 1, 2, 3, in that order for hand raising.
I was just gonna say, I've had this exact conversation with a friend of mine, where we're going back over, the history over a particular event, and we both agreed on the exact same things that we witnessed, and we both came to radically different conclusions about the nature of reality because of it.
Okay.
And the best way that I could figure it out was that he had very different life experiences, and so was seeing things through a very different lens than I was.
Okay.
But ultimately, I couldn't solve the problem.
Okay.
I couldn't reconcile his reality with my reality.
So I think where you sit is actually where we sit on a bunch of different issues. What I'm trying to drive down to, was there anything that you guys would have had in common there that he would have agreed spoke to some maximally reasonable metric for the measurement of happiness, comparative happiness, to this present state versus its future state? Because the drunk person who jumps off the bridge presumably actually doesn't have a future state of happiness that matters because they're dead. So you're like, oh, he'd have been fine because he'd have been dead, it wouldn't have mattered. Can you imagine justifying that to your friends? And being like, oh, well, I saw that the worst thing that could happen to him is he died, in which case he doesn't know anything anyway, so it's fine. What are you giving me a hard time about? He died happy. What's the matter with you? What would your friends say back to you? Yeah, man, but you took all of his future happiness away, that's not what a good friend does. Well, why is that not what a good friend does? He was happy. Didn't you tell me that just to let him be happy?
So that's where I think it all comes down to, if you do not ascribe to a source of absolute truth, like intellectually, or it doesn't you can do it with Islam. I think there are problems with Islam, but Jews, Muslims, they have an answer to this. But if you all come from a materialist point of view, you will act contrary to what you say you believe. Yes. Right? It requires that you do not behave in line with your beliefs, where you say, oh no, everyone should be able to do whatever they want. But then that person in that moment will see their wife about to jump off a bridge.
You're 100% right about this point. I'll grant that point, but I'm not looking to point out to the person that they're a hypocrite.
There's no point in looking for the answer when the answer is they're illogical.
That's what I was trying to say.
It's an unanswerable question to say, what is the reason for someone acting contrary to their reason?
Let me defend them for 1 second. Yeah, let me defend them for 1 second. It's not that they're hypocritical. It's that, like scientists who is trying to figure out the thing, an engineer or scientist is trying to figure out the reasons to explain this behavior. There was a missing variable that they didn't really realize they were missing. And the missing variable,
that doesn't give you justification to act. That's still just a reason.
It's not a justification. It's an explanation of why they're missing it. So the thing that they're missing is this: there is no, and you're pointing this out, is that there is no way in graphing happiness, and maybe even we'll do it over time. There is no way in doing this that you can even graph happiness over time, unless you believed in something.
An absolute standard.
Unless you, no. So I think you're right, there is an absolute standard. But you can't graph it unless you agree that there's at least a relative standard.
Yeah.
That there's one state of happiness that's greater than another. Mm-hmm. Furthermore, you can't graph it over time, because some people have brought up hey, don't make it a function of time. Who said that the heroin addict is incredibly happy in the moment? Whoever, yeah. So to that point, the pursuit at that point would be like, what drug state or what state period makes you the happiest comparatively possible? Everybody should do that, and if you die immediately afterwards, no big deal because you hit 10 on the scale, right? So if we thought that it was simply about how high can you hit, then what we all ought to do is hit that high and immediately kill ourselves because we've done it, right? But what we do instead, honestly, is we integrate over time. And we say, what you really want to do is to maximize the integration of the function of happiness in your life. For you mathematicians out there, I hope you're happy. For those who are not mathematics, it's by weight. How much happiness can you pour on the scale over time, even if it's a grain at a time or if it's a shovelful at a time? We prefer shovelfuls at a time, but ultimately, given I'm 40 years old, you want your pile of happiness, if you do really well, should be this high. If you're 40 years old and your pile of happiness is this high, you look around at other people's piles of happiness and you're like, your pile of happiness is bigger than my pile of happiness, why does it care? So we often do this comparative function anyway with other people. So if you agree that you have to agree it's comparative. Now, based on the comparative function, what gives you the right to say my comparative state is greater than your comparative state of happiness when the other person would disagree about the graph?
Well, I have 2 points. One, I think actually society views this opposite. It's not about maximizing happiness, it's about minimizing suffering.
Okay.
So I think that can be a point where like the heroin addict may have points of great happiness, but they are suffering more than they are.
But what could you make the argument that this is the graph of suffering?
Ooh, fancy.
But another thing with current society is
that's the cleverest thing I'm going to do today, by the way.
More important than anything else. So if someone says I want this or I don't want this, that's the moral. Like in Canada, they're now letting people have assisted suicide even if they don't have cancer or something. People
right.
can just be like, you know what, I want to die. I'm going to go have a nice painless death.
Yep.
And so a lot of people are saying, yeah, that's totally fine.
Right. Now, it's one thing to say that's totally fine in the abstract. If this person I don't know wants it, oh, okay, for all I know. The way that I want to do this one, and the reason I want to do it is because I think love enters as acquaintance, is your best friend, somebody who you genuinely love, just decides that they want to die. What's your argument against that? And we'll skip forward because you guys have answered this. You're really going to make the argument in terms of their future potential happiness. Like, hey man, look, I know it seems tough right now. Your girlfriend left you, you lost your job, it's been tough, but I'm telling you, you're a great guy. You're going to find somebody who loves you. You guys are going to, like, if I could forecast for you this amazing family that you would have and how happy you would be, would you still be suicidal at this point? And hopefully you could convince him of like, there's a lot of this there's a lot over here that you're giving up on. And the baseline assumption, by the way, is that everybody, which we all agree on, is everybody's interested in maximizing their own happiness. So you're making an argument of, you're at a local low, and for heaven's sakes, don't sell the stock. Keep it for a little bit longer because you're going to sell up here later.
This isn't how human beings change their behavior, though. I mean, there's actually, I'm involved in an employee-owned company.
I agree, but I don't. But hold on. For the sake of this, I don't want to talk about how to change their behavior. I want to talk about the justification for doing it.
Well, what was the point?
The point of finding a justification.
Like, so we all understand.
Because when you find the justification to answer this one, you've answered all of them. All of the questions that you guys put up here that we listed, when you answer this right here, all of them are answered. This is the answer to my son is gay. What do I do about it? This is the answer to my friend is caught in a lifestyle that I don't like. This is the answer to why not to transition. This is the answer to all of these things. They're all the same. It's all the same answer.
But if human beings don't change their behavior based on that, then they have to come up with something more.
But they do. But what I'm saying is, I agree. I agree that there's a practical step past. There's a practical step past the theoretical on this one. But I want the theoretical step first. Then we can argue pragmatics. You're right. I hope you're wrong, but you might.
No,
be wrong.
I wish I was wrong. But the fact is that actually psychologically, they've done studies showing that when people think of future state human being, they think of another person, of themselves.
Right. So how do you help them get to right? Yeah.
I guess in terms of justification, there may be a lot of reasons, but the one to me that would be on the highest level of justification is my love for you.
That's right. Now, that's 100% right. Now you've got to justify to me this. So here I am. I'm your heroin addict, and you tell me like, Scotty, look, and this is what people say who sit people down for an intervention, right? Scott, we love you. We're your family, we're your friends, we're whatever. And it's because we love you that we're about to wrap you up and throw you in the tank, right? That's the justification.
That's the highest level of
yes.
And justification that I can come up with.
And so when you make the argument about why should you not get an abortion, the answer is, Sally, I love you. And I want you to know that this course of action you're going to take is going to have consequences that you don't at the present see. Because Seth and I, Jesse and I were riding the train yesterday, and you guys have seen Dulles Tower, the Dulles Airfield. It's got the small tower that's right by and it's got that giant tower in the back that's like 3 times the height of this tower or something like that. When you pull by in the train, you can only see the one tower because a very short building actually obscures the other one in the distance. So this is the lesson you all know, which is things that are closer to you proximally in time or in experience often loom larger than things that are absolutely larger. But you would say some perspective. So you would say, with the right perspective, this short-term solution to this crisis that you're having in your life right now is going to cost you in mental health and physical health. What if someday, you want to have your own kids, but now you can't because you're physically damaged, or alternately, the emotional damage that this does to you is underrepresented by society. The people who you're counseling you do this are not thinking about that. I'm telling you, and you start making all these arguments. 3 in 4 women who have had this procedure say they wish that they didn't. Whatever the data are that you're going to bring, I made that up. The data are that you're going to bring forward to do this. You're making this argument because I love them. I love you, and I want you to be happy. And furthermore, you are in a position right now where I'm telling you, you can't see the total amount of happiness. Society itself, maybe you could even argue this, society doesn't understand happiness. We have accepted this level of happiness, and we ought to be accepting this level of happiness. But even not that, even if you just use the societal measure, you can say, even compared to the average person in society, you're going to be far less happy than if you don't do what you're going to do.
Isn't that a coincidence that God's view happens to be the same?
No. Yes.
I think
Not a coincidence.
something that I'm noticing though, we keep talking about friends, taking care of their friends,
Yes.
and loving. That definition of love though is something that comes from God, that comes from absolute truth.
Right.
So
We
you
are.
can't really, there probably are friends out there that do believe what you said, where you're gonna let the guy jump because he's happy and that's what he wants. And the friends in New York, in Canada, that may be letting their friends go to the hospital. There are love in their minds. So unless you have a definition of friend and love that is based off of something, like he's saying, you don't have this as some absolute truth.
Fair enough.
You
Then
can't justify.
to the person who is willing to buy, and unfortunately you're right, there's a lot more people that seem to be in this, like, you wouldn't let your friend do this, would you? And they'd be like, yeah, of course I would. And you're like, oh, I thought that was a knockdown point, right? Good gracious, how far are we on? It's this one. Timmy, or again, it'd be inconceivable for you to, Scott, you're telling me that I shouldn't have interfered in Steve trying to fly, right? Because who am I to judge his happiness, and maybe he's happy. Let me put it to you this way. Or I'll put it to you as though you're the person. If you were so intoxicated that you thought you were in place A, but I saved you from jumping off the bridge into place B. Wouldn't you want me to stop you? And find me and anybody who answers furthermore, like, no, I only live for the moment. Okay, they're so far gone that none of these arguments are going to work. To your point, you got to go right back to like, well, you're just so far off reality. We're going to have to take you back to the baseline, which is let's start with, the arguments and then God, and then work our way up from there. But any reasonable person is going to say, no, I wouldn't have. Thank you. Any reasonable person would have said, even if you put it this way, this actually happened last night. What would you do? All of them, any reasonable person would be, hey, thank you for saving my life. That's what they would say. Now, if you would say thank you for saving my life, why is it not the case, reasonable to assume that everybody would think the same thing? And then you say, well, what if I was at my absolute wit's end? I hate my life, and that at this time, I wish you to let me jump because it would have been better than my existence here and now. Okay, and so maybe somebody's so depressed that they're like, I wish you had. That's where you make the argument of like, here's other potential happiness you could have, and we're going to help get you there together.
I think too that if it were me in your shoes, this is how I want someone to treat me.
Yeah.
That's I think where you were headed.
Yes, that's right.
How I think that still is depending on the golden rule, like God's idea of love and friendship. Right. Treat me the way I would want.
Yeah, but is there anybody out there, reasonably speaking, that doesn't believe in the golden rule?
Yeah, but that becomes if you don't consider theism, it's a cognitive distance.
Yeah.
I
mean, nihilists.
That's right.
Nihilists would say they don't.
That's right. So Seth, and then let me go to Seth, and then you got next.
It's like most interventions involve like a withdrawal of voluntary support or like an offer of voluntary support. So a lot of it's like, I won't enable you anymore, and if you choose to get help, like we'll help you.
I got you.
Which I say like most like libertarians would like say that's like that person's like, it's not a interference into the person to offer something. To go beyond that, I think implies an idea of like guardianship, which traditionally like has been a standard.
You're in the case of the bridge jumper, you're the guardian of your friends.
Right, where there's like the same way you like if you find a lost child, there's like a imputed guardianship, or the same way if someone is like impaired enough, there's an imputed guardianship.
Okay.
But I think like that idea, like it was stronger in the past, but now it's like it's constantly been eroded.
Yes.
Because like one like there's a like you know better than the other person.
Yep.
So the more that has eroded. They say like the justification for it is eroded because there's not like absolute standards.
Yep.
But in the same way, to explain why people still do it, they just say that it's an instinctual response.
Yeah.
The same way like mother cats instinctually care for kittens, like humans might instinctually want to act as guardianship for someone else, but that's unjustified. It's just a natural response that people have to be educated out of. So if a parent like instinctually wants to stop their like kid from choosing something, like the parent is just acting instinctually from evolution, and so like the civilized thing to do is to be like, no, like let the child do what they want.
Okay.
So again, Seth just stated very well the moral argument, right? Do you have objective morals and duties?
Yeah, and it is going to, no doubt, it's going to reduce to this. I'm trying, at the end of the day, I take your point, which is you're never going to find a ground for these people to say to these people where these people is the group of people who don't believe in any objective morality. I think you're right. All that does end in like obviously you do believe in objective morality. You're just trying to say not to. But those who even don't will, by bonds of maybe you're I forget the term you used.
Like guardianship. Has, like,
but the guardianship is but the guardianship is derivative of a feeling of love. So the guardianship that you have over this abandoned child is probably articulable in terms of, well, the general love, regard we ought to, where love is defined as a benevolent, selfless regard for somebody else, for another. Which benevolent, selfless regard should be adequate. The benevolent, selfless regard is for the child and the child's parents. If there are no parents, then for the child itself.
Well, do mother cats love their kid?
Guardianship then is just a level of that.
So what?
Well, hold on. I want to get my point in.
Yeah.
Love does not grant authority. we can have love for someone, and you said, yeah, love is the justification. No, love does not grant authority, right? Justification is ultimately, do you have actual authority, right? Like, is there a just reason for you to exert your will over theirs? And love does not grant that. I can love you, Scott. I can love you biblically, correctly. Yep. That still does not give me the authority, if you're doing something, to just say, I will force you to do otherwise.
So what if I only considered the term justification? So you and I are going to think in terms of a derived authority for the reasons we understand. To the person who doesn't recognize the authorities, just the word
incoherent in your
the word justification kind of means something else. So absent a framework of absolute moral authority, the word of justification could be taken to basically be this minimally, an excuse for my actions.
Right. And
so what's the excuse for my actions? I interrupted my friend's course of action. My excuse, hey, sue me, I love you.
Right.
And most people would turn around and be like, okay, I see why you did that. You're excused based on the obvious only motivation is your love and regard for the other person. I would chat maybe you'll find somebody in the course of an argument that would disagree with that. But even the most strident libertarian or whatever else would be like, your love for the other person, especially your correctly motivated love for the other person, ought to be adequate to excuse your actions. You're right in terms of justification.
But if we recognize that there's no moral argument for the secular as to why they actually have authority to act,
yes,
and that it's all just, oh, well, why are they acting in this way? It's because they prefer it that way, right? Like,
brother, I grant it. So don't forget
about it.
Because what I'm trying to do is help us figure out a way to walk people who don't believe as we do into using this as an example. There's two paths. Let's say that you got a guy that you disagree with on the social issues. Let's go to the moral argument and bring him back up. That doesn't always work. In fact, it almost never works.
Right.
So what I'm trying to do is show you a place where you can show a way that you can show the person that on your own lights, you believe that your love for the other person outweighs their right to choose freely.
Right.
And then the next question is like, well, then why do you think that your judgment of what's right is? They may at that point even say, I don't know that it is, but I know that I must act this way because of my love for the other person.
Right.
Then you turn around and say like, okay, I will grant you that your love is a proper motivating factor. Like, yes, that should be the thing that motivates you. I agree it should motivate you. Now, how do you know, brother or sister, that your beliefs about the heroin addict's relative happiness are correct? And then force them to tell you why they think that it's obvious that the drunk who's going to jump or the heroin addict who's tubing their life is less happy than they could possibly be. And then make them give you some standard for it. And they'll say, well, I compare the average human being to them. Let's do that. Well, guess what we just did there? If they make that argument, they've just said that you should intercede in any trans person's transition. Why? Because on average, trans people report being significantly less happy than the average person reports being happy. So if you're going to say it's obvious based on mean societal happiness versus the person's current happiness or projected future happiness, and that's their justification, then what you're saying was, if it's the case that you think you should intervene in your friend's heroin addiction, then it's also the case that you should stop people from transitioning. And this is what I'm looking to do, is to lock people into an understanding that they are already making this judgment in other areas, right, and that the same societal judgment. And then that should lead into the discussion that you really want to have, which is, how do we know what the absolute metric is, or even absolute direction is, for any of these, and that will give you a natural portal into the objective.
Right, I get the attempt, but they still do have an out in that they can say, no, the trans person was born trans and they have a lower possible happiness than the average person, right? Yeah, trans people kill themselves at 80% or whatever, whatever percentage it is compared to the population. That's because, they were born this way, and this is still the best thing we can do for them given their current circumstance. And they can do that with anything. A person with one arm has a lower possible happiness. You can say, oh, you should play baseball, you should play baseball. They're going to say, I was born with one arm. Playing baseball doesn't make sense.
Yeah, but one arm people don't report being less happy than the average person.
But they're not going to agree with you on that. They're going to be like, no.
But you don't have to agree with you. You go to the data.
From the secular viewpoint, they can just be like, we don't have a way to actually measure it. There is no, you lose that ability to say, this is how happy the average person is.
Oh, I disagree. There are data on this. There are data on this, and that's the point.
So what's the data on happiness? How do you measure happiness?
Oh, there's a World Happiness Report. Like there's a whole measurement system about how they do this. You can argue whether it's a good one or not, but the point is, even by secular measurements of happiness, you can make this argument. And forget the secular measure. Like who knows what the standard is of the World Happiness Survey? I know some of it, but let's say that they're completely wrong about it. According to the individual to whom you are speaking, they have a happiness metric. They have such a happiness metric that they've already told you that based on that happiness metric, they would intervene in people's lives. So they've already got a standard. Just get them to state their standard. Yes, ma'am.
I would say, like, because we're talking about love and saying that we love other people, I think a justification is based on what that person would do. Because oftentimes people can have
Which one, the individual or the person they're talking about?
What I will say is a lot of people have more self-loathing, like they're able to love others better than they can love themselves.
Okay.
So like in It's a Wonderful Life, where he's thinking about jumping off the bridge, the angel jumps off the bridge, so he saves the angel. Right.
I'm willing to save you even though, okay.
So like, of course I save you because you're willing to save me.
Okay. So what tie this into the larger point?
Well, we were talking about like it's justification because we love them. Like if we can get them to say that they love us, like it's easier to love other people oftentimes more than it's easier to love ourselves.
Yeah, this is a good point. And so to your point, I think that you would say, this is why I didn't say, I guess I did. I was trying to get around the person who didn't believe that. Who was just like, nah, if Clarence wants to jump, that's Clarence's deal, like nothing to do with me. Whatever person that is, but there's a small group that might say that. Even for them, then the question is, well, would you want me to do this for you? But I would say for hopefully something like 99% plus of the population that would work for them. Kevin and then Seth.
So, quick question and clarification, 2 specific examples. You talk about somebody who's refusing cancer treatment at, say, age 40.
Yeah.
And basically saying, part of it is I'm going to lose a lung, they're going to have to amputate both my legs, and I'm going to basically live in a vegetative state. So future happiness is low.
Yes.
Right? So what's the argument there to say, hey, let cancer run its course, ravage the body, destroy, rather than making, so I know it's a little bit different, you're saying to stop something that's bad, but do something bad that's going to stop something bad, and then with a low happiness future state.
So on the secular front only, I think that this goes into a related but separate topic. And the related topic is down to whoever to the metric question of like, okay, well, if you're going to talk about fine gradients of like, what's my future possible happiness versus my future possible misery versus like what it could be, there you're like, well, your measurements matter because we might be making marginal judgments at this point. So I think what you're really talking about is a real deep dive into what is happiness, what is your goal in life, what are you even here for, how do we measure the value of a man, all that kind of stuff.
How do you respond to somebody who expects a pretty high ROI? Like I'm like that. I do not want to spend a lot of time and energy on something. If you're telling me like, hey, from the age of 80 to 90, you can have 3 more grades of happiness.
Yes.
I'm like, well, that's just
I would almost point at the rest. I would make an argument by numbers on this one and say, okay, everybody who lives in the first world right here ought to be so comparatively happy to everybody else that that sometimes the cure for this is terrible, I don't want to end it all, is go take a 4-week trip to Bangladesh. Go sit in this village for a little bit. Go to Brazil where the people are literally living off the dump, and many of them appear happier than the average American in this particular job corporation or whatever else. In which case, the answer it might be something like one, adjust your perspective, and the other one might be like B, you're working in the wrong company. But ultimately, if you consider the level of apparent the level of apparent happiness that compared to you, other people are willing to tolerate in the world, and yet still cling voraciously to life. You have to answer the question of why 6 billion people are willing to be happy, are not only willing to live, love life, compared to the standard in which you live.
Calvin and Hobbes has this thing where they're going down the hill doing one of their philosophy things, and Calvin's talking about how he wants to be continually happier over and over with each experience, topping the next, until he like basically flies off into the eternal.
Yes, yes. Yeah.
I'd like to throw out two things that I've thought about.
Yes. This will be the last comment for the day, and then we're out of time. We'll
First of all, you really can't guarantee anyone a future greater happiness than where they are now. I mean, you may save their life from jumping off the bridge, and they may have every day of their life may be miserable.
So before you get to your second point, let's hold on that one for a second. I didn't pay any attention to the fact that one must sit at the table where the mean philosophical viewpoint is closest. Now I'm starting to sort you guys, by the way, by this right here, unintentionally. I can't remember who brought that point up here. But I'm going to go to my table O-key opposition and say, to your point here, I object.
Present.
Yeah. No, you're supposed to say, we're not the table of opposition. Yeah. How dare you, sir?
What do you mean?
What are you talking about? Justify your
question with a question.
I do.
Gosh, Scotty, restate your point, please.
Me?
Yes.
Okay.
I lost my own train of thought.
I'm just saying that.
Congratulations, opposition table. You win.
You're intervening into this because you believe the person, you want to promise the person future greater happiness.
All right, so let me sit at this table for a moment and be like, of course you can promise them future greater happiness. Their problem is they can't see it because they don't believe in God. But if they believed in God, the one thing you can guarantee them is if they choose to make Jesus the Lord of their life and to accept his salvation, then God has guaranteed for them that everything will work together for their good and that their future happiness will be ecstatic bliss.
You can promise them maybe with a few correct choices.
Yes.
But okay, second point is, when you're considering intervening, you have to go all out of this. You have to, if there were a law saying that if you intervene, you're going to go into the raunchiest prison for the rest of your life because you're not allowed to intervene.
The most
willing to throw yourself into it?
The most convicting thing I've ever heard said to me was, and I need to look it up, I forget who it was, but notorious criminal in England a couple hundred years ago, was being led to the scaffold, and the priest was like, repent, accept, forgiveness, etc., blah, blah, blah. And the guy who was completely unrepentant and didn't care said to the priest, he was like, you don't believe what you're talking about. And the priest was taken aback, like, what are you talking about? Brother, don't think this way. You're at the end of your life. You must. And he says, if you believed what you say actually happens to people when they die, he said, you'd crawl across your knees on broken glass the whole of England to make one convert. Don't tell me that you believe in this one. You don't put out enough effort to show that you disbelieve that. So there's some answers to that question, but that one, it makes me think every day of like, oh, you know what? He's kind of right about that. Like, if I actually love the people around me and I see them headed towards this area, maybe I should be a little more motivated to do something about it. Okay, if your hand is up, write down your point. I will give you the floor first next time, unless Michael insists.
It's just I want to know the answer to this.
So okay.
I'm looking forward to next time.
Very good. Okay. So what I'll tell you is, I think you should break your thinking, as has been highlighted today, into a circle of always. This circle is always to justify it. I do think there's a right half and a wrong half, but this one's going to be absolute, and this one's going to be relative. So many people who believe as we do say, how dare you even think about the relative judgment? Like, you're talking subjective morality, you're talking comparative morality. Yes, I am. Because in the absolute, you can always point to the standard here is God, and everything we're talking about, we're going to compare to God and how he is. On the relative standard, what you're comparing to is as you yourself say. So what you can point out to the person who believes in an absolute standard, the way that you show somebody's wrong that believes in an absolute standard is, what you say is true is not what God says is true. And then the person will be like, guilty as charged. On the relative standard, what you can say is, you're not acting the way, what you're saying is true doesn't comport with what you say is true. You're contradicting yourself, you're being a hypocrite. They will not accept your accusation of hypocrisy. I've yet to find the person who's like, yes, I'm a complete hypocrite and I don't care, right? What they'll turn around and say, I'm not a hypocrite because, but you have to show them that their circular reasoning that points out the judges themselves.
Yeah.
Right? So you're going to say this is bad over here, but if that's bad over here, it means you're bad over here. That's what that implies. So that's the way to argue the relative side. I was interested in arguing the relative side because if you can trap somebody or show somebody that they are caught in this trap, that's motivation for them to realize that their method of thinking about this is wrong. And by the way, it might make them realize that this entire half over here is wrong and maybe they need to come back over here to this side, in which case now you start running a better version of the moral argument on them because they're ready to hear you, hopefully at this point. Okay, obviously we are out of time. Thank you very, very much. We'll continue this next time. I do think this is an important thing because I'll say this when I'm talking to Dennis, my justification, the answer that I give to Dennis about his son comes from this thinking.
What I would say is if relative is based off experience, show another experience.
Yeah, that's a technique. Absolutely. Terrific discussion in class. I love solid ground. That's why I love it. If I cut you off or suppressed you, I apologize. It was hopefully you understand my motivation is A, that everybody understands the discussion completely, and B, to those of you, and particular, can I excoriate you for a moment? To all of you who come to me after class and bring up brilliant points, shame on you. Stop it. Stop. Bring them up in class. Share. I am not the person, I may be the person most in need of your wisdom, but let other people benefit from your wisdom. So bring it all. Bring it all the way up. Yeah. Touche, sir. Touche. All right. You guys have a great week. I'll be with you.